and hand it over to Teresa.
Okay. Again, thank you for joining the Legislative Coffee with the League of Women Voters, and I'm Teresa Bolton. The Bonner Springs NAACP, I'm representing with them, and the Bonner Springs Library, of course, with Jack. This morning, we'll hear from Senator Pat Petty and Representative Melissa Oropeza. Um, Senator David Haley is not here yet, but if he does join, we'll join him in as well. And please note that they were all invited for the legislator to participate. I will go over a few housekeeping items before we begin. So this is an educational, nonpartisan event for the general public. Our legislators will have 3 minutes opening statement, and then we'll have 3 minutes to answer questions during the question period. We will provide a countdown of the remaining time. And our timekeeper's right here. So you'll have a minute and 30 seconds at a time for the countdown. Please submit your questions on the note cards you have in your seat there. We will provide that through a chat, and then I'll read the questions here. And the partner organization co-sponsoring the forum believe that democracy works best when citizens are informed and active. We hope this legislative coffee provides you the opportunity to learn more about the legislative process and what is happening in the state of the House. Okay, so we will begin by asking the senators and the representatives to speak for 3 minutes about what they're doing in Topeka, one at a time. And then at this time, we'll move on to our questions. So first we will have Senator Petty to speak for 3 minutes, and she's gonna let us know what she's doing in Topeka.
Well, good morning, and it's great to see all of you. I am Senator Pat Petty. I represent the 6th District, which no longer encompasses any it goes portion of Edwardsville, but with redistricting, it does not encompass that. So I'll just say I have a lot of Wyandotte County and a small portion of Johnson County. Around Marion is where the Johnson County piece is. I'm into my 4th term in the Senate. So I'm starting my 13th year. And I have to say, I was an educator by trade. I taught in the Turner School District for 36 years. And with education, I always felt like, am I prepared? Am I ready to go? Even though it was year 36, you know? And I think you have to come with that kind of a feeling all the time that you want to learn and you want to use the knowledge you gain, but you want to learn. And I would say that's true with the legislature. I serve on public health and welfare, local government, ways and means. I'm the ranking minority on ways and means, and on education. I'm also on, I'm not even going to go into them, I'm also on several joint committees. And let's just say I feel like I'm overworked and overbooked most of the time. But I very much value being elected and representing my constituents and all the citizens of Kansas. I have to say that I think that the biggest thing that's going on this year involves process, because it's difficult for us to know what the process is every day and how things are moving on. For someone that's not in the State House, it has to be almost insurmountable. Because there are bills that are being introduced, having a hearing like just the next day, or maybe they've just been introduced and they actually haven't been read in, but they're going to have a hearing tomorrow. It's not the process. It's not what usually happens. So that makes it hard for you to track. It makes it very hard for me to track as well, where those bills are going. It also, and it also makes it difficult for you to ever have the opportunity, or for citizens to testify on committees or provide testimony. Some of our committees are paperless, some of them are not. You can tell I'm not a youngster, so I am learning more and more. I'll do the paperless, but sometimes it's almost impossible for the staff to keep up. So some of my committees that were paperless are now not paperless because the staff has had such a hard time to keep up with them. So I look forward to my time's almost up. I look forward to your questions, and I'll be glad, I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to expound on some of the other things that are happening with pieces of legislation and funding that I feel that are very detrimental to our future in Kansas.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Senator Petty. And now we will ask Representative Oropeza to speak for 3 minutes as well. She's going to speak as well.
Hi, good morning. I'm Representative Melissa Oropeza, and this is my second term. So I am a new legislator. Just finished up my first term. So I currently represent everybody, Wyandotte County, Armadale, a portion of Turner, 1 street in Argentine, and then I got a portion all the way out to 94th and State Avenue. It's a very oddly drawn district. So I can't give you really, because it goes in and out of streets, but anyways, from redistricting. And I'm currently sitting on legislative modernization, health and human services. And I am the social services banking, budget ranking this year, which is new for me. So I wanted to echo a lot of what Senator Petty said about the process. I sit on a few committees that we're not even allowed to ask questions, or we're left to the very end, or we can't even get things out if we're questioning things. So the process has been very much negated the way I feel, and not followed to any standard whatsoever. I've had constituents reach out to me as well saying, well, what about this bill? And I missed that hearing. And I just tell them, unfortunately, we are the super minority, and the major super majority makes the rules, and they are pushing things through that I too believe will be detrimental for the future of Kansans. In saying that, we've done maybe a few decent things, very few, but our first and foremost priority this year for both the House and the Senate side was gender affirming care, and making sure that didn't happen. I don't know how many of you that impacts your life on a daily basis, but it does not me. So I have no idea why that was done, pushed forward. We even worked the veto, it's done. So that was our first and foremost priority from this legislative session, which was very sad for me. It was very a discriminatory bill. It just very saddens me. That's why we're spending our time up there instead of things that really we heard at the doors and we wanted to have done here in this session. So I'm also excited to hear what you have to say. Hopefully this will light a fire and get people out to really pay attention of what's going on at the state level. We really need your help up there and going forward. And thank you very much. And thank you for taking the time to be out here.
Thank you. All right, and now we will move on to our questions. If anyone has a question, please write on your note card and we'll submit it. Okay, so our first question is, I'm very concerned about SB 87 and how it will redirect money from public education. What are we able to do to prevent this, and where do you stand? So we can start with Senator Petty.
Sure, you know, sometimes when I get a number, I don't really know specifically that bill, even though I'm on Senate Education. So that is a common theme. I would say maybe part of it is redirecting, but also it's working on lessening the resources so that it might not be completely happen in this session, but in next session, there won't be they'll say, well, we have a shortage of funding. This will lead me to talk a little bit about the budget process. And in the past, and I mean, the whole time I've been in the Senate and prior to that, the legislature works from what's called the governor's budget. And the governor is spoken to in the Constitution about the governor and her constitutional responsibilities. And one of them is presenting a budget. However, the majority party has now taken the position, well, that doesn't mean we have to work that bill. We can introduce our own budget. So they started this conversation at the end of last session. And I told you I'm the ranking minority on Senate Ways and Means. So then prior to the session starting in 25, I attended 7 interim committees. 5 of them were for a special joint committee about the legislature developing their own budget. And it's Senate bill, or it's House Bill 2007 is what it is now. And so that's what happened in that 5 days. Now the governor, in contrast, the governor has staff and they work for 4 months crafting a budget. If you were in charge of DCF, you would make a presentation, you know, what your budget priorities are, and to the governor's committee, and then that would be researched, and then they would, the governor would put out her budget, and then you would have, as the director of DCF, would have an opportunity to support those things that maybe the governor had not approved. And then it would move on to be the final budget that the governor presents. So, but that, I told you, we've spent 5 days. So we came up with a budget, and we just went from the budget from last year and then took out any provisos. And so it actually, we created a lot of little problems, I gotta tell you. But the governor's budget now is just a piece of paper hanging out there. When we work on the budget, I will ask staff and they will say, this was in the government budget or this was not. The goal of this was to say, hey, we were going to have a budget that was less than the governor's budget. So that was the goal. And the House, but the process was changed, because in the past, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go over my time, but the process was changed. In the past, the governor's budget, the House would work the governor's budget, the Senate would work the governor's budget, the House would make changes and amendments to it. They would have hearings, they have subcommittees, just as the representative said to you, she's the ranking on one of those. We would have hearings, we had subcommittees, and then we would come up with a budget. House would come up with a budget, they would be sent to the House and the Senate floor. We would pass those, and then they would go to conference committee, and we would come up with a joint budget. Well, this year, the House worked the budget and came up with, this is Senate bill, this is House Bill 2007. It's just a little bill, but it is the state budget. And we did, I don't want to say we did nothing, but we did not work the budget in Senate Ways and Means until last week. And now, next week, we're going to be finished. I should think about these numbers here. So I sat through, and so whereas before I sat on subcommittees, and we would have, you represented a particular organization that was looking for some funding, or you have a particular project that you wanted to see remain in the budget. You could make a presentation. That's not the case now, not on the Senate side anyway. The House was a little bit different, and I won't go into theirs because they did have hearings. But on our side, the only person that got to speak about the Department of Children and Families budget, which is a large budget, was the secretary. The only person that got to talk about health and environment was the secretary. Nobody else. So if you were interested in something particular that you wanted to see in the budget or stay in the budget, or that wasn't in yet because of what the House did, and you were hoping that it would be, or you just wanted to see the funding continue, the base funding continue, which is, we didn't necessarily do that. Then you came and talked to people that were on the committee. And I have to tell you, there are two of my party, 2 Democrats on the Ways and Means Committee. The rest are, so it's a super majority on the committee. So my voice is about as important as sometimes. And so I really don't have a lot of success carrying any kind of amendments unless I have somehow coerced my colleagues to support that. So I'm just giving that to you because that, to me, although they're saying, hey, we wanted to speed it up, it's really shut you out. And it's also cause for less knowledge on the part of legislators as well. So I'll start.
Okay. Well, keep in mind, we do have to keep it at 3 minutes, so, I know that was
You
not
want to know about the
a
process?
second. Well, it had 2 or 3 parts in that question, so, but we want to make sure we get through all the questions for everybody that's joined today. So, yes, would you,
Okay.
you want me to
I have
repeat the
not heard
question?
Senate Bill 87,
Okay.
but it talks about a tax credit. How are we going to give credits if we're not going to support and manage what we already have? But yet we're already giving out tax credits, or we're hearing bills that give out tax credits if we're not even through the budget process. And then from what I understand, since I'm a newer legislator, we don't even know what last year's budget's going to show until April 15th or so, after we're out of session. So how do we know what we're doing and what we're saying okay to? And we don't even have what we did last year of how that's going to shake out this year. So, and it did talk about giving low income. I did look at it really quickly. It talked about giving low income tax credits to students. Don't be fooled by that. Everybody's going to take advantage of that. And it's going to deplete what we have in public schools. Originally, the Kansas State Board talked about 82 million for special education. Then they came to a consensus. The governor put in her budget 72 million, and then it went to committee, was stripped down to 30 million. Then it was stripped down even, that was in the education committee. And then that special education fund was at 30 million. Then it was stripped down even further in appropriations to 10 million. And the
And
word,
now there's nothing,
I would say,
there's nothing on the Senate side for special.
and there's nothing else. And then word on the street is they're gonna take that 10 million as well. I don't know, that hasn't happened yet, but according, that's gonna be stripped out continuously as well. So we're not even supporting our special education folks in public school. Again, disheartening, again, super majority. We can sit up there and scream and have our voice, but it's gonna happen regardless of what we say. And it's gonna fall back on the voters to really be involved and to really see this process and to not forget what is happening this session. That's my 2 cents.
Now that Melissa's reminding me, I'm sorry, can I just add a little piece on? Okay, so I actually did set, as I said, Senate Ed, and I did vote no on Senate Bill 87. And here's the thing about Senate Bill, we have a low income tax credit, scholarship, tax credit already. This is an expansion of it. It is no longer low income. It's never been a scholarship. But now we have nothing in statute except for CHIP, where the income level is figured on 200% of the federal poverty level and federal poverty income. This one is. So parts of it are, but also parts of it are, if you are in this particular profession, then you are eligible to get this. And so if you're, and I love all these people. I mean, I'm going to say my children went to a parochial school. And I paid for them to go to the parochial school because I made that personal decision. That was my decision. Now we're being asked for all of us to pay for whether it's your grandchildren or your great grandchildren or your children to go to parochial school. But we also want to have quality, great public schools, whether you live in Edwardsville or Bonner or Kansas City, Kansas, or Johnson County. Those schools define your communities. So when they say it's not taking from, it is taking from, because there's only so much money in this pot, and you start taking out of this pot. So so now if you're a firefighter, if you're a firefighter and your wife's a doctor, you're eligible for this for your children. It's up to $8,000 a year. And so I just want you to see this. So before the expansion, which the expansion started 2 years ago, before the expansion, these tax credits had helped, I think, 1,300 students statewide. After that expansion, it doubled. It doubled. Because the first expansion opened it up to, now it's opened, it was K-6, now it's K-12. It also raised that 250% for a particular category. Now that one category, so several categories I talked about, there's nothing 250%, doesn't matter what their income is. So I'm just telling you, that expansion happened with one change. Now we've opened up even more. So yes, there will be more children taking advantage of it. They will not be low-income children.
Okay, so we have several questions to try to get through. So we want to make sure again that we're being respectful of the time for each question for each of you. So our next question,
Do I need to write my question?
yes, sir, please. And then well, she'll submit it to her and then she'll put it in the computer and then I'll read it. So our next question, Representative Praise, I'll start with you. The concern about limiting early voting options in Kansas, how can we be assured that early voting by mail and ballot and area sites can remain accessible? Kansas does a much better job than Missouri at this.
Oh, well, they're coming after your voting rights and they are chipping away at early access and early voting. If you're not on social media or you need somebody to help you with that, I would definitely look at what Pat Proctor, Representative Proctor, has talked about in his meeting. He wants election day to be election day. 7 o'clock on election day, they're chipping away. I was on elections the first 2 years I was in the legislation. They talked about getting rid of ballot boxes and how unsecure they are. They're talking about getting rid of the 3-day further. The 3-day grace period is going to the governor's desk as of now, Senate Bill 4. They want to make it as hard as possible for people to vote, which I just find amazing. So I don't know, the horse might have already left the stable. This may already go. Again, we are the super minority. They have the votes to pass this. They want it, it's gonna happen. So unless some people from the other side of the aisle stand up for their constituents and you lay that pressure on, it's gonna happen. And we'll vote against it. I don't think we'll have any problem saying no, but it's gonna be up to the super majority. And somebody from across the aisle is gonna have to stand up for people that they represent. That's what it's coming down to. And what really needs, and I'm gonna say it again, I'll keep saying it probably through this whole hour, is you've got to hold these people accountable. That's what it's going to come down to, being an educated voter and not just being a party line. You may not like everything that I vote for, which is fine. We can have a conversation and I'm more than willing. That's why I'm here. That's why Senator Petty's here. We're here to take those hard questions and to talk about it and have a conversations. As you can see, we're the only two here. Hold those people accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Petty.
Sure, I'll just follow up with that because, neither one of us actually represent Bonner.
Where they are. But I would agree, we already have one of the smallest windows from when advanced voting starts to the voting day and in the country. And so that's important to keep in mind as they talk about, as you hear about changing these voting opportunities. I'm looking out at you, I'm assuming you're all voters. And maybe you vote by mail, maybe you do advanced voting, maybe you vote the day of. But guess what? You have those opportunities and those choices. We want to keep those in place. I was there, Melissa was not there. All of my colleagues, no matter what their party, voted for that 3-day window following the day of the election for the ballots to come in if they were postmarked on election day. They all voted for it. It worked. It helped. And I got to tell you, has anybody had any trouble with something not getting where you want it with the post office? Well, it's not just ballots, it's lots of things. I could go into something that didn't arrive where I wanted to go not too long ago for an organization, and that was 11 days or 12 days before it ever arrived there, and they needed it for an event. I had to do it again. So we all know there's problems. Well, the same thing's true with our ballots. So that's the 3-day window, but we talk about the ballot boxes or advanced voting, having advanced voting sites. These are all tools to help all of us and your families to be able to vote. And we always talk about wanting more people to vote, and you don't have a no say in the process if you don't vote. So I'm just saying, we want people to vote. I don't care if you're voting for me, I want you to have the opportunity to vote. And that should be the most important thing that we encourage people to do. And so any of these bills that are going against extensions or shortening are not in our best interest.
Okay, thank you, Senator Petty. Okay. Our next question is, do you support SCR 1603, the bill to amend the Constitution of the state of Kansas to limit property tax valuation increases for real property? Senator Petty, if you can start with that. 3 minutes now.
Okay. I'll just start out by saying, no, I don't support putting in our Constitution a cap on property valuations. I'm going to be very honest about that. I mean, I would totally agree. I have a house, I pay property taxes, so I don't want to see mine to continue to go up. They're based on valuations, we all know that. But that's artificial. It could cause, over time, it could cause my house to be locked at a certain level, and Melissa comes in and buys or builds a house next door to me. She's up here. Now I'm wondering why she's wondering why is she here and why am I here? And there's well, hey, the Constitution said that. So that's gonna cause more angst than it is gonna cause solutions. There's a couple of bills that I'm not as familiar with as Senator Paiza is, because they just passed out of the House, that are looking at other ways to address property taxes. So I think that we have other tools in the toolbox. And I'm just gonna say, overall, I am not interested in changing our Constitution, whether it be for this or whether it be for judicial selection. I'm not in favor of any of those.
Thank you.
So for the, I'm not in favor also, as well as a 3% cap that's coming for a constitutional vote as well, because as you talk about these bills and as you ask questions and you think about them long-term, that would be horrible for young people trying to come into this state. To have certain people locked in at a 3% and then everybody else has to come in higher, just as Senator Petty has shown. There were a few bills that we did vote on yesterday. One is another constitutional amendment. It is in regards HCR 5011, and that was supposed to have a residential property base and a rolling 6 years to kind of even things out, to kind of find a nice middle ground. I was told that was a decent option. It was soft. But now hearing Senator Pat Petty, I'm like, she's right. We shouldn't be putting this in the Constitution. We should be working on this long-term and making those things. So that was not brought up yesterday. Unfortunately, additional with that, they also put in to make sure corporations could get this rolling tax, which I thought was awful too. But at the same time, you're right. People are screaming for property tax, some type of relief. I did vote for that, but again, it'll go over to the Senate and they'll hear it, and we'll see what happens ultimately. But I just don't understand why we can't focus on residential, why we can't focus on the people of Kansas before we start focusing on corporations and their tax credits and what they need. We really need to focus on Kansans in Kansas. So, that was one. And when I think about these tax bills, obviously, my background is I'm a healthcare professional, I'm a nurse practitioner, so, I have to ask a lot of questions. I try to make the best decision that'll help the most amount of people within Kansas. So that's what thought process when I look at these types of bills. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like for me to repeat that question, Senator Petty, on property tax?
Oh, she
I
did.
I started.
You,
I spoke
you,
first.
you did, I'm sorry.
was gonna say,
It was quick, I'm sorry.
You want me to second by that?
No, you had some time, that's why I wrote it down. Thank you, sorry about that. Okay, the next question is, what is the outlook for balancing the state budget? And Senator Petty, if you'd like to start with that one. I won't
Well-
forget this time.
We have to have a balanced budget. We're not the federal government. We have to pass a balanced budget. So, that's the best way I can answer that, is that we have to have a balanced budget. So there is, I would say be cautious about talking about reductions, because there are critical responsibilities of the state, one of them being public education. 60%, about 60% of our budget goes for public education. And so the majority of what's paid for with state dollars are critical services. So and we have to have a balanced budget. So if you reduce that, then you also reduce the amount of money available for those critical services. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that if we talk about whether it's education or whether it's the IDD waiting list, which there's been a lot of outcry about having a waiting list, an IDD waiting list. And last year, the legislature put in money to reduce that by 500. This year, in this HB 2007 has been put in for a 320 people reduction on that. But that has cost that's involved with it. And that's an expanded cost for the IDD population. And in order to do that, you have to have the money to pay for it. So unfortunately, what I see happening is that that's the whole thing about squeezing. So you have a budget here, and then you keep lowering it. And there is the issue of, do we have enough revenue coming in? So that goes back to taxes. You know, are your taxes, whether they're property taxes or income taxes, are they paying for those services that you want? And there's the whole thing about KDOT, wanting our roads taken care of. So we always have to, from the state perspective and from your perspective too, we have to look at, are we have enough to have a balance? And so we're looking at what kind of reductions can be put in place so we do have that balance, because we are seeing, if we continue to make tax changes that bring in less money, which we made tax changes last year, like you're not going to have to pay if you're figuring your income taxes now, you're not going to have to pay taxes on your Social Security. So we're looking at that, but that comes with a cost. So for me, it's keeping that in mind as we work our budget.
I agree with everything that Senator Petty said. Yes, and that was a point of the, when I said earlier, we're not even gonna kind of know what the total impact was from last year's budget with those tax credits for Social Security, as well as the food tax and all of that's gone into, we won't even know that till after we're out of session. So we don't even kind of figure out where we are to figuring out, like, we're already giving tax credits to people. So yes, we definitely need to have a balanced budget. And then at the same time, who are we giving those credits to? Like I said in the last one, I was just like, can we just focus on the resident of Kansans for once? Can we just focus on what they need first before we start talking about businesses or bigger, or businesses and corporations and those types of things? So I agree completely with what Senator Petty said. Need to have a balanced budget. We need to make sure that when we're doing this budget, kind of what are those little extras they're putting in and who those are for. I remember the last year, first year is always a whirlwind. So my first session, but the second session, I was listening to $1.2 million for airplanes, $500,000 for 2 houses in Butler, Kansas. I was just listening to all this money being spent and I'm like, how does that help the whole state? What are we doing here? What about everybody? There were a lot of pet projects that were introduced into the budget in 2024 that were not heard in committee, that were just kind of shoved in there, specialized, special projects for certain areas. So I believe there's 8 or 10, if I'm not mistaken, but it was very disheartening to hear how that process went. So if you're concerned, I would definitely make sure you listen, watch, everything's on YouTube, out in the open, and watch that process.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, Representative or Praiser, if you could start with this. In terms of limiting the voting window, what is the best way to hold our legislators accountable?
I would say call them. As we said before, we don't represent Bonner, so you need to call your people. Make sure you are inundating them like they are at the federal level with emails from everybody. It'd be great if it came from both party lines. Should not be a party issue. Everybody should have that voice. If we're not voting, we're not much, I mean, if we're limiting voting, we're no different than other countries. That's what the United States is about, being free, being able to vote for those people who have a voice for us, not limiting that. What direction are we going if we're starting to limiting things? What are we going to start to become? A possible regime? I mean, what does that look like ultimately down the road? That we're starting to limit people's freedoms and that the voice they have to pick who represents them. I would do phone calls, I would do emails, I would do letters, go up to the Capitol. And don't forget, when the time comes again, don't forget. Make sure you're educating your neighbors, your community, young people, first-time voters, unaffiliated voters. Make sure they're being educated as to kind of what this person did the last time, to make sure that they're not allowed to do it for the next time.
Thank you. Senator Petty, you need me to repeat that question?
Limiting voting rights.
Mhm.
Sorry. It's really hard to be informed about everything. So, if access to the voting is the issue that you find to be the most important, then I would say, read everything you can. I don't watch Fox, so I'm sorry, I can't help you there, but look at different sources of information. And I'm just going to reiterate, voting is our number one responsibility as citizens. A lot of times people so when you're talking to somebody else, I mean, you don't have to go door to door, but when I've gone door to door, there've been people said, well, I don't, I use my driver's license, they have all inaccurate information about how they are, I don't vote for this reason. Then I'm gonna get called to serve on a jury. That's why I don't vote. A variety of not accurate pieces of information. So I just think reminding people that that's the way that they have a voice and how important it is. And really our goal is not to see someone who's as supposedly dead voting, but that everybody who is a registered voter gets to vote. You know, some states you can go and register the day you vote. You can't do that in Kansas. Would be nice. I would support that, but you can't do that in Kansas. You have to be registered to vote. So we, you know, you should encourage people, hey, we've got laws, they protect, you know, that these people, that it is person that's of age and lives in Kansas and is voting. And a reminder, a Secretary of State, I mean, our election commissioner in Wyandotte County would concur, but the Secretary of State for the state of Kansas has said we had very, very few flaws in our voting system. And so when that gets thrown out there, it's not validated. It's not true. And, you know, he's not of the same party I am. He's actually running for governor now. But he's done a good job in that position, and he's supported the right for people to vote. So let's use if we're talking about Kansas, and that's where we live, then let's use information about Kansas. Let's don't go wherever somebody wants to go, which I hear sometimes on the floor. Let's talk about Kansas and what Kansas rights are, and respect those, and the fact that our election systems are doing a good job. They are safe and secure, and they're not being violated.
Okay. Thank you. Our next question, and I'll come back to you, Senator Petty. How do you feel about voters electing Kansas Supreme Court justices?
And that's SCR 1611. It did just pass. In order for a constitutional amendment in order for a bill, SCR 1611, or a couple others that have already been mentioned, they have to get a supermajority vote, 27 votes on the Senate floor, and to be able to go on to the House. And then we cross our fingers and hope the House will not have the number to do that. It did get 37 votes on the Senate floor. I do not support SCR 1611. I think it's important to think about, so we've had this process in place since 1958. And the reason the Constitution was changed in 1958 was because of illegal activities that were going on with our Supreme Court judicial selection process. So because of that, then work was done to put this in the Constitution to change to the process that we have. So it's a bipartisan committee. It is made up of 5 lawyers that are selected by the Kansas Bar Association, from their association. And so they're lawyers that work within Kansas. Then there are 5, I think I'm right on that. There are 5 citizens that are selected by the governor. And I will just tell you, I do know this, that and I think on the last, it might be on the last one or this one before, that former Mayor Carol Marinovich was asked to serve on there. That they served then, and so, you know, lawyers can apply, and then there's a selection process by this committee, and they're vetted. It's very thorough. They're interviewed, and then that committee recommends 3 names to the governor, and then the governor makes the selection. So it might sound great to say, hey, now I'm going to get to vote. But then you start reading about other states. And guess what? In other states across the country, what have become the elections that are bringing in the most outside donations and campaign contributions? Judge elections. In some states, it's been over $2 million that have been spent on judge elections. I don't want to see that be the case in our state. So I think the process that we have is working. It's fair. It's bipartisan. So I did not support SCR 1611, and I'm waiting with bated breath for when the House votes for it, and hopefully they won't get supermajority.
Well, we haven't heard it yet, so, but, we've heard a little bit about it. It has not been worked on the floor yet, obviously. I'm hoping people won't vote for it. Again, this is gonna be for special interest. This is gonna be for, money. This is gonna be money flowing into the state from outside sources because they obviously want something or need something within our state. This could potentially look at different items that we've had come across the state, and potentially, unbalance the Supreme Court, which nobody wants. Everybody just wants a fair shake at what's kind of being evaluated and being done. So, in looking at that, I did do a little bit of looking at it just because I thought it might come over. The corruption, and this is why we have it from the get-go. Why would we ever go back to that? We know it didn't work. Why now? What's the point? I think there's definitely some ideas to come forward. I think things that were posed to the voters that they voted overwhelmingly, to keep our reproductive rights. Here in the state of Kansas, it was given up to the voters. The voters did their votes, they were heard, and that was it. So if things change, is that going to be challenged? If something happens with the 3-day grace period, or they start getting rid of ballot boxes, or they try to make our window even smaller than 20 days, is that going to then be coming to the Supreme Court? Are we going to have an unbalance of, yeah, this is what we want to do? Are we tipping the scales towards something not everybody wants? Regardless of what do we feel about kind of the votes that we've had thus far, we should all just want a fair process. That's truly our background, and a fair and united process, and it's bipartisan. So to work on those issues, I don't plan on voting for it. I'll definitely be a no, but we've got to hope there are some people on the other side that will see how this process would be so unbalanced for the entire state.
Thank you. So we probably have time for 3 more questions. That sounds about right. We do have several more in there, but I will try to narrow in on the ones that, okay, the next question is, why are we seeing all these amendments this session? Senator Petty, if you can start with that.
Amendments or do you mean changes in?
That mentioned 3 already, that are going on out, right?
Oh, constitutional amendments. I'm sorry. Thanks for clarifying that. Opportunity. You know, it's an opportunity. You have a supermajority. And here, okay, I told you this is my 13th year. When I came in 13, I was elected in, well, I came in 13. There was a supermajority then. There were only 9 senators. However, there was a different atmosphere in the Senate and in the House too. There was a more bipartisan attitude towards, I will just say, a lot of social issues. And so things like this would never get brought up because the majority, I mean, those that wanted to change the Constitution for where it was, they knew they couldn't get the votes. So that's totally changed. So now there are 9 again in the Senate and of Democrats, but I don't have, or there are very few on the other side who are willing, even if they don't really support that position, but they're unwilling to vote against the leadership. Because, I'll just be frank with you, because I feel like they will be threatened. If they're a committee chair, they'll lose their chairmanship. You know, or they're just come in and they feel like, okay, I really have to vote with, and they're getting a lot of pressure. I mean, I've been told this by them, by certain people. So it's a prime opportunity to go for those constitutional amendments for things you want to see changed.
And so this whole thing about Supreme Court selection is not new. It's been around. It's now prime time. And so that's why I would totally agree. That's why we are seeing these things that are changing the Constitution. And that's why I'm very frank in telling you, I'm not voting for them. Because we have a good Constitution that protects you and protects your rights. And I don't see any reason to be changing them. So it's kind of like the Convention of States. So we passed the Convention of States and the Senate. I don't know about what the House. Oh, I think we both did. And so that just, people think, oh, I'm for the Convention of States. You have no idea what they're going to talk about. We have no idea who's going to represent us. Everything's open. A lot of people are for it because they want to see term limits at the congressional level. But that's not the only, you have to really think about, do we want our Constitution, our United States Constitution, just like our Kansas Constitution, being challenged? I know.
I agree with Senator Petty. I think it is prime time. They've already talked about, I think the most we can have during an election or during a session is 7 amendments. And they've already got it all figured out of what they want and what they want voters to vote on. And they've strategically, supermajority has already decided what's going to be in the primary and what's going to be in the general. So make no mistake, there is a strategy to this. They're hoping that things just kind of float through. Your ballots are going to be extremely long, and it is not going to be clear when you read it. This is going to take some education, and this is going to take some really evaluation of going in and looking what's actually put up for you. So there are some things that they want to do for the primary, and there are definitely things they want to do in the general. And at the end of the day, none of it's going to be good for the state of Kansas, ultimately. So I am also going to be a no on a lot of these types of constitutional amendments. But in saying that, I think it's again, as Senator Petty said, it's just prime time. They want to see what they can slip in. They want to see if people are paying attention and what this ultimately looks like. And it's going to take a lot of people getting together and being educated to see what these ballots are really going to be looking like.
Thank you. Okay, we have time probably for 2 more questions. 1 more? Okay. Is your work affected by the new priorities and cuts at the federal level? And Representative Appraiser, would you like to start with that?
Yes, in social services budgets, we see a lot of the budgets and a lot of those from social services, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, Department of Children and Family Services, KDADS, Kansas, KDADS, I'm forgetting the acronym for that, sorry. But a lot of those budgets were come through. A lot of those budgets have federal matching. So we have a lot of federal matching that is drawn down. The state has to provide their part, and then we draw down an additional monies in order for those services to be provided. So when they talk about cuts to Medicaid, when they talk about cuts to anything in general, that will be detrimental to the state of Kansas at the federal level. We're able to do parts of the programs, but not all of them in their entirety. So when they talk about that, there are a lot of groups that are just in turmoil. There are a lot of populations that are in turmoil, just not knowing what that ultimately means, and not knowing what the ultimate outcome will be. We are 6-8 weeks in, and it's just constant. People are just constantly in fear about, are they going to be able to provide services for people in the state of Kansas? What does that ultimately look like for children who are on Medicaid? What does that look like for our seniors? What does that look like for our disabled population? Like I said, a lot of those programs are matched at the federal level. What type of services are we gonna be able to provide you? And we just kind of, it's a wait and see, and we ask all the time, but nobody knows anything more than what the organizations have already been, working at the federal level. And unfortunately, there's just a lot of unanswered questions. And so we're just, like everybody else, waiting to see when the other shoe actually does fall or drop. What is it gonna mean for us as a state? We've already seen when the USAID was cut, that's impactful for farmers in the state of Kansas. That was big. So there was some shuffling. I do think they were able to kind of reshuffle things different places, but ultimately farmers are getting hurt, and that's our exports. So tariffs and those types of things. But anyways, we'll have to see what ultimately ends up happening. Unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of more information other than that.
Thank you.
So I support everything Melissa said. It's not something we're talking about a lot, but we do know that, you know, it's so volatile right now that it's going to impact. I mean, I was just watching the morning news and I saw a little program about the Kansas City Farm School, which is located on Gibbs Road, right in my district. I don't live too far from there. And the fact that, and they help provide programming for a development of disabled students that go to Turner High School. They come there and, you know, learn some skills. Sometimes they can end up getting employed there even. But they're funded with federal dollars through the Department of through the Farm Bill. And although they haven't been cut, they're not getting their funding. So their funding stream is not coming in. So they don't know. So that's for them. You may know someone that's been in Head Start and some of our Head Start programs for a period of time. They were on hold because they didn't know they were able to backfill for a bit. That funding now has been, well, it's still coming, but that's just another example. There's SNAP, there's WIC, there's the school lunch programs, there's special ed. I mean, there's so many things that are programs that are impacted that, and as Melissa mentioned, sometimes they're fully funded with federal dollars. SNAP, fully funded with federal dollars. It's the programming that there's state dollars to help with the program. WIC, fully funded with federal dollars. And what do those programs do? They feed kids. So do we want, you know, we have about a 19% level of children that have food insecurity in the state of Kansas right now. I don't know. I don't really want to see that become 40%. And the other part of that is it does impact our farmers who help to provide those foods that are subsidized, that are provided within the school lunch programs, those other programs, or the access for those other programs. So it's unending the places it can impact, and education. So education, if we start looking at cutting dollars and then your federal dollars go away, you know, we've heard, or I've heard from the state level saying, oh, I just want, you know, it's state responsibility, send it back to the states. But if the Department of Education would close and we lose those federal dollars, it does impact a lot of services that go for special needs children. And, you know, we have moved to the point over time that we feel that every child is entitled to have their educational needs met at the highest level. And so that's why we have more children with a lot of needs within our school population, because that's giving that opportunity. We don't have some place for them to go back to, except to sit in their homes and not have any opportunities if that's taken away. So it's a big unknown, but it's a big unknown with not a sunshine over here, but with a deep hole over here. So that's my concern as we work at the state level
that we don't know how deep this hole is. And where it's gonna end up. And so it's a big unknown I hope you don't know anybody who's already been laid off at their job, but we know that's impacted, and that impacts our economy, and that, it's all has its own effect.
Thank you. And thank you all. Thank you. This is all the time we have for questions today. I want to thank Senator Petty and Representative Fraser for coming out. And everybody that came out today. And I also want to just thank you for engaging with your questions. Those of you who we didn't get to, I apologize for time, but I'm sure that if you want to stay and talk amongst other people, that's fine too. And I also want to mention the NAACP because that's what I'm representing today. And there's a few members here. You guys want to raise your hands? And we have some renewed members back there too. I just want you all to keep in mind that the Civil Rights Organization is very important as well too. So I have some handouts for what NAACP is about, and we can represent Bonner Springs the best we can with unity with all people. And sometimes people are confused about what the NAACP is, but if you have questions for me later, that's fine too. I'll try my best to help with that, but we want our branch to be strong like we are and unite together. And we make sure people are educated on voting. So we want to make sure we do that too.
I just want to add, thank you to the library. I knew Jack when he was with the Kansas Libraries, and now been a great asset for the Bonner Springs Library. I worked hard last year to help to get the formula for funding from the state level to go back to what it had been, or at least moving towards what it had been. And there's now, on this House side, the $1,000 per library has been taken out. So there's still the possibility that can happen on the Senate side. This is your library. It's a great library. I took time to walk around. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't value their libraries and what they provide. Again, when you're talking to people, always mention libraries because they are free and they provide so much for everyone, whether you're a 1-year-old or whether you're 99 years old. There's something that you can find at your library. So just got to give a shout out.
All right.
All right.
Eat
a donut.
There's more donuts than coffee. You can make.
it.